My husband, the father of my 3 daughters, secretly dated each one of them in turn. You didn't hear that wrong. The man who slept beside me for decades was the very same man who seduced my 3 daughters and even intended to make a move on my 7-year-old granddaughter. My ex-husband, 15 years my junior, the man who once swore eternal love, almost destroyed my entire family out of greed. This isn't a soap opera. This is the true story of my life. A disaster that ultimately turned into a blessing, but it cost me tears and sleepless nights. My name is Patricia Morgan. I'm 81 years old, and this is how I unmasked the demon hiding in plain sight. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. I was born and raised here in Malibu, California, the land of famous beaches and movie stars. Today, I own 12 boutique clothing stores across the Los Angeles area, but I started with a tiny shop, so cramped you could barely fit the racks of clothes I sold. It was 1,972, and a woman owning her own business was rarer than a rainy day in the summer around here. Men would walk into the store and ask for the owner, and I'd puff out my chest and say, "I'm the owner. And how can I help you?" Many would turn and leave, preferring to pay more at my competitor's store than to negotiate with a woman they saw as too clever for her own good. Tell me in the comments what your name is and what city you're watching this story from. A story that seems like a lie but is the absolute truth. I want to know who the strong women are on the other side, listening to this story that's going to shock you. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't some soap opera drama, it's real life. It happened to me and my daughters. A disaster that turned into a blessing in the end, but it cost me tears and sleepless nights. I was always different from the other girls my age. While my cousins were getting married young and having a house full of kids, I was studying accounting at night and helping my dad at his flea market stall during the day. Dad had been selling clothes at the flea market for as long as I can remember. When he got sick with a heart condition, I took over the business. The other vendors laughed, saying I'd be back to doing laundry for people within a month. But those were the same people who, years later, came to ask for loans when I opened my first real store, complete with a glass door. In the beginning, it was pure hardship. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., drive to downtown LA to buy merchandise, come back to open the store at 9 a.m., and wouldn't close until the last customer left. Sometimes, at 8 or 9 p.m., I didn't have employees, an alarm, or even a proper fan. Sweat would drip down my face as I measured fabrics and did the math in my head, but I felt so proud at the end of the month when I counted the money and saw there was a little bit left over to reinvest. It was by saving those small bits that in 1978, I bought the store next door and knocked down the wall, doubling my space. It was around that time that I needed to hire help. Business had picked up, and I couldn't handle it all by myself anymore. I put an ad in the local paper, looking for a part-time accountant to organize the books that I could no longer keep up with. 3 candidates showed up, 2 elderly gentlemen and a young man, a recent graduate with a leather briefcase under his arm and a smile that lit up the whole store. His name was Michael Jones. He was 22 at the time, while I was already 37, considered an unrecoverable spinster by the gossips in the neighborhood. I hired Michael because he charged less than the others, simple as that. It wasn't love at first sight or any of that romantic nonsense. It was a pure business arrangement. He was good with numbers, organized, and punctual. In the first few months, we barely talked beyond what was necessary. He'd arrive, open the ledger books, make his entries, organize the invoices, and leave. But slowly, he started making suggestions. "Miss Morgan, if you buy in bulk, you can get a better price." Or, "This particular item isn't selling well. You should run a promotion to free up capital." And the rascal was right. Sales started to improve even more. When he completed a year working for me, I invited him to lunch at the best restaurant in town to celebrate. It was that day, after 2 glasses of wine, which I never drank, that I saw Michael in a new light. He had a hearty laugh, the kind that starts in the eyes and ends in the mouth, and he paid attention to everything I said. Even when I talked about simple things like my mom's recipe for lemon bars or the orange tree in my backyard. I won't lie, I felt alive in a way I never had before. I, who only thought about work, was suddenly daydreaming like a 5-year-old girl. When he took my hand to say goodbye that day, I felt a shiver run from my fingertips to the roots of my hair. A week later, he invited me to the movies, and I accepted, even knowing the age difference, even hearing the voice of my late mother in my head saying that this wouldn't work out. The whole town talked when we started dating. It's obvious he's only after her money, they'd say behind my back, but loud enough for me to hear. Poor thing, so smart in business and so foolish in love, the neighbors would comment, but I was determined not to care. For the first time, I was putting my own happiness before other people's comments, and Michael seemed genuinely in love. He brought me flowers, even when it wasn't a special occasion. He'd call me just to say he missed me. He'd wait for me at the store's door with a smile that melted my heart, a heart of a mature woman who had never known true love. We got married in 1,980 a ceremony that was the talk of Malibu. I was in a wedding dress at 40, and he was 25, more handsome than a movie star in the navy blue suit we bought in Beverly Hills. The age difference was obvious, but I didn't care that day. When I exchanged rings with Michael, I felt like I finally had it all. My own business, which had already grown to 2 stores, and now a husband who, besides being handsome and caring, understood accounting and could help me expand even further. Soon after the wedding, Michael suggested we expand the business. "Patricia, you've conquered Malibu. Now it's time to conquer the whole Los Angeles area." With the money we had saved and a bank loan, we opened a store in Santa Monica. It was such a huge success that the following year we were able to open another in Pasadena. Over the next few years, our growth was explosive. We opened 3 more stores in quick succession in Beverly Hills, Glendale, and a flagship location in downtown LA. By the time of our divorce, we had a chain of 7 stores. I spent the week running between the 3 cities while Michael handled the administrative side. We made a great team, each with our own skills, complementing each other. And in the midst of all this work, I had my 3 daughters. Marta was born in 1981, a year after we married. I was 41, and the doctors had said it would be nearly impossible for me to get pregnant. She was our little miracle. I had to put a small bassinet in the back of the main store because I couldn't bear to be away from her. Michael proved to be a doting father. He changed diapers, gave her bottles, and rocked her to sleep so I could attend to customers. The town, which had criticized me for marrying a younger man, now whispered about me having a child at my age, but I was too happy to care. Lydia came 2 years later, another beautiful surprise, and Rachel completed our trio in 1986, when I was 46 and thought my childbearing years were long over. 3 beautiful girls with their father's smile, and, as everyone said, their mother's determination. I juggled diapers, bottles, meetings with suppliers, and training new employees. It wasn't easy, but every cent that came into the stores meant a better future for my daughters. So, I worked with passion, even when exhaustion hit. It was around this time, with the girls still young and the business growing, that I started to notice the first signs. Michael began taking frequent trips to buy merchandise, coming back later and later with less inventory than expected. Cell phones didn't exist yet, so I'd stay home waiting, worried, with the girls already asleep and dinner getting cold on the table. When he arrived, he'd have ready excuses. The supplier was late. The traffic was terrible. I had a car problem. Once, I found a receipt from a motel in his pants pocket when I was doing the laundry. He swore he had gone with friends after a fishing trip because he was too tired to drive home. I believed him, or pretended to, because I was too busy opening the 4th store, this one in Thousand Oaks, to investigate. And deep down, I was afraid of what I might discover. Michael was younger, more handsome, and I was entering my 52nd, with a body marked by 3 pregnancies and hair starting to show the first signs of gray. The excuses became more frequent, as did the nights out and the mysterious phone calls he'd take in another room, speaking in a low voice. I noticed. I'm not a fool, but I convinced myself it was just a phase, that he was stressed with work and would soon go back to being the attentive husband he was in the beginning. After all, we had built an empire together. 6 stores spread across the Los Angeles area, a beautiful house in Malibu, and 3 healthy, intelligent daughters. Who would throw all that away? What I didn't imagine was that while I was busy building our future, Michael was planting the seeds of our family's destruction. The bomb exploded on a Tuesday in October. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had gone to Beverly Hills to close a deal with a supplier of imported fabrics and came back earlier than planned, wanting to surprise him. The one who ended up surprised was me when I walked into the main store's office and found my husband and my secretary, Julia, on top of the desk where I signed the checks every day. In the very heart of the empire she built, on the desk that symbolized her power, Patricia faced the most painful betrayal. A wound that came not just from her husband, but from the humiliation in the place she was most proud of. And yet this was only the beginning of a nightmare she could never have imagined. Let's find out just how far this tragedy will escalate. The world stopped. I swear to God, I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. They jumped up startled, she adjusting her blouse, he zipping up his pants. "Patricia, it's not what you think." He had the nerve to say that, as if I were an idiot. I didn't scream, I didn't break anything, I didn't make a scene. I simply said, "You're both fired. Get out of my store now." My voice was so cold it didn't even sound like mine. That night, when I got home, Michael had already packed his bags. He was sitting in the living room with the 3 girls crying around him. "Dad said you kicked him out of work," sobbed Rachel, who was only 13 at the time. The other 2, already teenagers, looked at me with a mix of confusion and accusation. It was then that I realized Michael had already set the stage, telling his version before I could explain. And what a version it was. According to him, I had gone insane with jealousy over a simple conversation with the secretary and unfairly fired him. "Girls, your father was betraying our trust." It wasn't a simple conversation. I saw it with my own eyes. I tried to explain without going into the sordid details the girls didn't need to hear, but it was too late. Marta, the eldest, already 20, was the harshest. "You always work too much and neglected Dad. He's young, and you're already 60. What did you expect?" Those words cut deeper than a butcher's knife. My own daughter was throwing my age in my face, justifying the infidelity as if it were something natural and expected. The divorce was a war. Michael hired an aggressive lawyer who challenged everything, from the division of assets to the custody of the girls. Since the 2 oldest were already over 18, they could choose whom to live with, and they chose their father. Only Rachel, still a minor, officially stayed in my custody, but she spent every weekend with him in the apartment he rented in the city center, coming back more distant and rebellious each time. The worst part was the division of the stores. Since Michael had worked as the accountant and administrator of the business from the beginning, he managed to prove he was entitled to 40% of everything. I nearly had a heart attack when the judge ruled that 3 of the 7 stores we had at the time would go to him. Stores that I had started from scratch, that had my sweat and dedication in every brick. But the law was the law. And after almost a year of legal battle, I signed the papers with a hand trembling with rage. The girls were divided, not just physically, but emotionally. Marta and Lydia practically didn't visit me, convinced by their father that I was the villain of the story. Rachel lived between 2 houses, carrying the weight of a divorce that had shattered what was until then a close-knit family. I dove even deeper into work, opening an 8th store less than 6 months after the divorce, as if I could fill the hole in my heart with fabrics and sales. The first few years after the separation were a silent, grinding agony. The gossip was a constant hum in the background. Couldn't hold on to her younger husband, they'd whisper as I passed. But the whispers were nothing compared to the deafening silence of my own home. I'd walk through the door, and the quiet would hit me like a physical blow. I'd catch myself cooking dinner for 4 out of habit, only to stand over the stove and stare at 3 empty plates. Some nights, I'd sit in the living room, in the dark, and I could almost hear the phantom echoes of my girls' laughter, the memory so vivid it was a fresh wound each time. The pain wasn't a fire, it was a slow, cold erosion. Work became my only refuge, my shield. Every bolt of fabric I unrolled, every ledger I balanced, every new storefront I scouted was a brick I was laying, not just for a business but for a wall around my heart. People saw me as a machine, a woman made of numbers and ambition. They didn't see that every dollar earned was a tear I refused to cry, every new store a fortress against the loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. That pain didn't just become fuel, it became my armor. I hired a competent administrative team, young college graduates with new ideas who modernized the business. I started importing fabrics from China. I was the first merchant in the area to bring in synthetic satin and microfiber. The financial success helped heal the wounds, but a mother's heart still bled every time I saw my older daughters, growing more and more distant. They had chosen to live with their father, to work in the stores that went to him, believing his version of our separation. Only Rachel, after turning 18 and starting college for business administration, began to visit me more frequently, curious about how I had built the business from scratch. A plan that almost destroyed everything I built, but would ironically end up uniting my family again in a way I never could have foreseen. But hold on, before I tell you how I discovered Michael's evil plan, I need to explain what happened after the divorce, because the disaster came little by little, like ants carrying sugar grain by grain, until there's nothing left. No one can imagine what it's like to see your own daughters, raised with so much love, turned into weapons in the hands of an unscrupulous man. The pain of a husband's betrayal is one thing, but when your daughters get involved, a mother's heart is squeezed until it's a husk. After I separated from Michael, I did what I always did in life when the pain was unbearable. I worked until I was ready to drop. I'd get up with the sun and only come home when the stars were already in the sky. In 5 years, I opened 3 more stores, forming a network of 8 Patricia Morgan Fabrics shops spread throughout the Los Angeles area. I modernized everything. I installed computers when no one else was using them. I hired young college graduates to bring in new ideas. I started importing fabrics that no one else sold in the region. While Michael managed the 3 stores he got in the divorce, I was turning my 5 into a small empire. The people of Malibu now called me Miss Morgan, a mix of respect and admiration that healed a little bit of the shame I felt when I was replaced by Julia. I kept in touch with my daughters as best I could. Marta and Lydia rarely visited. They worked with their father and believed his version that I was a work-obsessed witch. Only Rachel, my youngest, came to see me more often, especially after she started business administration school. She began to realize the story wasn't quite as her father painted it, and sought me out to understand how I had built everything on my own. These moments with Rachel were like water in the desert for me. It was during one of these visits that the bombshell dropped. Rachel arrived quieter than usual. She drank 2 glasses of iced tea before she could look me in the eyes. "Mom, I have something to tell you, but you have to promise you'll stay calm. When someone asks you that, you know something bad is coming, right?" I promised. And she blurted it out. "Marta has been dating Dad for almost 8 months. They're even living together. Lydia is furious and isn't speaking to either of them." Can you imagine Patricia's shock at this moment? The pain of a cheating husband is one thing, but for your own daughter to become the other woman, that's a sickness that crosses every line. What she didn't know, however, was that behind this twisted relationship lay a much darker and more calculated plot. Let's keep following to find out what it was. My body froze as if I'd been thrown into a deep well. Marta was in her early 30s, recently divorced, and Michael, my God, the man who was the only father she'd ever known, was now her lover. The thought of him, who used to read her bedtime stories, now sleeping beside her, made me feel nauseous. My mind simply couldn't process it. "They say it's not wrong because he's not her biological father," Rachel added, disgust in her voice. "Lydia and I both think it's sick." That night, I couldn't sleep, wondering if this was just to hurt me, or if there was something darker, more calculated behind it all. I didn't know then, but I was about to find out. "How did this start?" I asked, my voice trembling. Rachel explained that after Marta's divorce, she had become depressed and went to work at the main store that went to Michael. They started spending a lot of time together, late-night dinners discussing business strategies. Until one day, they announced to Lydia and Rachel that they were in love. "They say it's not wrong because he's not her biological father," Rachel said with disgust in her voice. "Lydia is furious. She says it's sick. I think so too, Mom." I couldn't sleep for days. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about how bizarre, how unnatural it was. Michael had put Marta to sleep, helped her with her homework, been her father figure for more than 20 years, and now they were together. The thought made me feel nauseous. I tried to call Marta several times, but she wouldn't answer. Finally, after a week, I worked up the courage and went to the store where I knew she would be working. When I walked in, the employees became tense, watching me from the corner of their eyes. It seemed everyone already knew. Marta was in the back office, the same one where I caught Michael with the secretary years ago. When she saw me, she turned as white as a sheet. "What are you doing here?" she asked defensively. I tried to stay calm. "I came to talk to my daughter." "Is it true what they're saying? You and your father are—" I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. The thought screamed in my head. "He's your father." "We truly love each other," Marta interrupted coldly. "He never loved you the way he loves me. You only think about work. You always have. Now you're going to act shocked? Please." Every word was like a stab. My own daughter, for whom I had spent sleepless nights when she had a fever, for whom I had sewn prom dresses, was standing there attacking me, defending a relationship that went against everything natural. "Marta, he raised you since you were a little girl. This isn't love, it's manipulation. Don't you see what's happening?" I tried to reason with her, but she laughed. A cold laugh I had never heard from her before. "You're just jealous because he chose me, because I'm younger, more beautiful. He said you would react this way, that you couldn't stand to see him happy with someone else." I left there devastated. In the car, I cried as I had never cried in my life. That night, alone in my empty house, I wasn't just crying over the betrayal. I was crying for my own naivete. I thought I was building an empire, but I'd forgotten to build a fortress around the people I loved most. That was the moment a mother's heartbreak gave way to a businesswoman's resolve. This was a game I had to win. It wasn't just the shock of the bizarre relationship. It was the cruelty of her words, the transformation of my daughter into someone I barely recognized. What had Michael done to her? What kind of brainwashing had happened? I spent weeks trying to understand, talking to Rachel, who was my eyes and ears in the situation. According to Rachel, Michael flaunted Marta like a trophy. He bought her a new car, expensive clothes, dinners at fancy restaurants. It's like he's rubbing it in everyone's face that he can have whoever he wants, even his ex-wife's daughter, said Rachel, disgusted. Marta left the apartment she had gotten in her divorce and moved in with Michael. People in Malibu whispered when the two of them passed by. "Look, there's the stepfather with his stepdaughter." Lydia, my middle daughter, was furious about the situation. She had always been very close to Marta, but cut off all contact when she found out about the relationship. They had a terrible fight, complete with yelling in the store in front of customers. Lydia slammed the door, saying Marta was disgusting and she would never look at her again. It was a scandal that spread throughout the entire city. In a small town like Malibu, where everyone knows everyone, a case like this becomes the gossip of the year. Marta's relationship with Michael lasted 8 months. 8 months of agony for me, watching from afar as my daughter sank into a relationship that everyone, except her, saw as sick. The end came suddenly, as mysterious as the beginning. Rachel called me on a Tuesday. Mom, Marta, and Dad broke up. She went back to her old apartment crying. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. I don't even know what happened exactly. I tried to contact Marta, but she continued to avoid me. Through mutual acquaintances, I found out she was devastated, that she had caught Michael with another woman. The irony was not lost on me. According to them, he had consoled her, saying it was nothing serious, that men have needs, and other flimsy excuses he had already used on me. But this time, Marta didn't accept it. She packed her things and left, leaving Michael furious for having been abandoned. I thought that nightmare was over, that maybe now Marta would see what had happened, that she would seek help, that she would return to the family. How naive of me. 3 months later, 3 months, the second bombshell dropped. Rachel called me in tears. "Mom, I don't even know how to say this. Lydia is dating Dad now. Does that sound absurd to you?" It did to me too at the time. But looking back, I understand that jealousy and the craving to be seen are a more powerful poison than disgust. Michael knew that. He knew how to weaponize a daughter's anger against herself, and my poor Lydia walked right into his trap. I thought it was a prank, a mistake, a nightmare. How could Lydia, who had been so disgusted by her sister's relationship with her stepfather, now be repeating the same mistake? But it was true. After consoling Marta over her breakup with Michael, criticizing him in every way, Lydia began to visit him frequently to keep an eye on the store's business, she said. In less than a month, they were together. This time, I didn't even try to talk to her in person. He never gave them time to breathe, you see. A new shock every few months. It was a strategy, a way to keep my family in constant chaos so no one could realize they were being played until it was far too late. A smart predator never lets its prey catch its breath. I called Lydia, who answered with a coldness that broke my heart. It's true. I'm with Michael now. So what? At least he gives me attention, something you never gave us, always too busy with your stores. And he's not my real father, so there's nothing wrong with it. The speech was almost identical to Marta's, as if it had been rehearsed, memorized. You know that feeling? When seemingly random pieces suddenly click into place to form a horrifying picture. This was no longer about feelings or relationships. It was a script, a calculated scheme. And I, Patricia Morgan, was the final act in his play. Lydia's relationship with Michael was even more public than the previous one. She posted photos on social media, showing off expensive gifts, designer handbags, jewelry, vacations. In one of the photos, she was wearing a white gold diamond necklace that I recognized immediately. Michael had given it to me as a gift when our third daughter was born. My love gave me this unique necklace. He had it specially made for me, the caption said. That hurt more than a slap in the face. A sick competition began between Marta and Lydia. From inseparable sisters, they became mortal enemies. Marta started bad-mouthing Michael to anyone who would listen, saying he was controlling and sick. Lydia retaliated, saying her sister was jealous and bitter. The two, who used to have lunch together every Sunday, now couldn't see each other without a fight breaking out. And in the middle of this crossfire was Rachel, the youngest, trying to mediate the conflict, becoming more and more worn out. I watched everything from afar, devastated, unable to do anything. I tried to talk to family friends, with Lydia's godmother, with former schoolmates, but everyone said the same thing. It's best not to get involved, Patricia. Let them sort out their own lives. As if it were that simple. As if they weren't my daughters being manipulated one after the other by the same man who had once sworn to love me. Lydia and Michael's relationship lasted longer than Marta's, almost a year, and the pattern repeated itself. Expensive gifts at the beginning, public declarations of love, followed by distance, lies, and finally, the discovery of an infidelity. This time it was even more humiliating. Lydia caught Michael with a call girl in the apartment they shared. The fight was so bad that the neighbors called the police. The incident became the talk of all Malibu. Lydia came home devastated, with deep dark circles under her eyes and 20 pounds lighter. I tried to reach out, to offer support, but she pushed me away. You must be loving this, aren't you? Seeing us suffer, proving you were right. Well, save your pity for yourself. And she slammed the door in my face. Her wounded pride wouldn't let her admit that she had made a mistake, that she had fallen into the same trap as her sister. More time passed, and I again thought the nightmare was over. My two older daughters had been used and discarded by the same man, but who knows? Maybe now they would see the truth. Maybe the family could start to heal. Rachel was still the only one who maintained regular contact with me, visiting me, and helping me at the stores when she could. She had graduated in business administration and was working with me, learning the details of the business. She was my comfort, my hope that at least one of my daughters had escaped Michael's clutches. Until one day, Rachel came home different, more dressed up than usual, with strong perfume, a strange sparkle in her eyes. I'm going out to dinner with someone, she said evasively. When I asked who it was, she changed the subject. An alarm went off in my head. Rachel, who are you going out with? I insisted. She turned red, then pale, then collapsed on the couch, crying, Mom, I didn't want to. I swear I didn't, but Dad has been reaching out to me. He says I've always been the special daughter, the smartest one, and that he's only just realized it. He calls me every day, sends flowers to my work, says he made a mistake with Marta and Lydia, that they weren't mature enough for him, but that I'm different. The world stopped. My youngest, my ally, my last hope, was being seduced by the same man who had already destroyed her sisters. And the worst part was, she seemed to be giving in. I saw in her eyes a mix of shame and excitement that terrified me. It was the same look I had when I first met Michael, the same one I saw in Marta and Lydia at the beginning of their relationships. Part of Rachel knew it was wrong, sick, but another part was fascinated by the attention, the compliments, the seduction of an experienced man who knew exactly which buttons to push. Rachel, for God's sake, you saw what happened to your sisters. He's doing the exact same thing. Flowers, phone calls, compliments, the story that they weren't special enough. It's a script, honey. He's manipulating you just like he did them. I said desperately, holding her hands in mine, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Rachel pulled her hands away and stood up, irritated. You don't understand. He's changed. He realized the mistakes he made. And I'm not naive like Marta and Lydia. I can take care of myself. I'm just going out to dinner with him. There's nothing wrong with it. And she left, leaving me in pieces in the living room. The following weeks were a torment. Rachel started coming home late, making up excuses to go out, and distancing herself from me. At work, she was distracted, making mistakes she never used to. The employees would whisper when she left early to run personal errands. I knew exactly what was happening, but I felt powerless to stop it. I tried to talk to her several times, but she always changed the subject. Mom, it's not what you think. We're just friends. We're talking about the stores, about business. But I wasn't naive. I saw her phone ringing all the time, the messages she read with a smile, the extra care she took with her appearance. My daughter, my youngest, was falling into the same trap as her sisters. The confirmation came in the worst possible way. I had gone to Santa Monica to sort out a problem at the store there, and came back earlier than planned. When I got home, I heard laughter coming from Rachel's room. Laughter that I recognized immediately. Her laugh, which I had known since she was a baby, and his, which I had known when I was young and thought he would be the love of my life. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. It couldn't be. Not Rachel. Not in my own house. I opened the door without knocking, and there they were, in the bed I had bought for my daughter when she started college. Michael jumped up startled. Rachel pulled the sheet over herself, her eyes wide with terror. Mom, you weren't supposed to be back today. That was all she could manage to say, as if the problem was my arrival, not what they were doing. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. A strange calm came over me, a calm that came from the purest despair. Get out of my house, both of you. Now. My voice was so low they had to strain to hear me. Michael started with the usual excuses. Patricia, it's not what you're thinking. We're truly in love. I raised my hand, interrupting him. Get out now, or I'll call the police. They got dressed in silence and left. Rachel still tried to say something at the door, but I couldn't hear her. A ringing sound filled my ears. My vision became blurry. The last thing I remember was the floor coming towards me as everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed with tubes and machines beeping around me. A nurse came running when I opened my eyes. Miss Morgan, it's so good you're awake. You gave us quite a scare. I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry. She gave me water through a straw. What happened? I managed to ask after a few sips. You had a very serious hypertensive crisis. Your blood pressure was 220 over 110. You almost had a stroke. Your neighbor found you unconscious and called the ambulance. You've been here for 2 days. 2 days. I had lost 2 days of my life, lying in a hospital bed, while my daughters. A sharp pain shot through my chest as I remembered what had happened. Did anyone come to visit me? I asked, a part of me hoping that at least Rachel had had the decency to show up, to worry about the mother who had almost died seeing her in bed with her own stepfather. The nurse hesitated and looked away. No, Miss Morgan, just your neighbor, Miss Dorothy, who brought you some clothes. None of my daughters had come. Not Marta, not Lydia, not Rachel. The 3 girls I had carried in my womb, breastfed, and raised with so much love, for whom I had built a business from scratch to ensure a secure future, hadn't bothered to visit their mother in the hospital. That's when it hit me. I was completely alone. In that moment, under the sterile hospital lights, I wasn't a business owner, I wasn't a mother, I was nothing. But you know something? When you're at the absolute bottom, there's only one way to go. And that's up. Michael hadn't just stolen my daughters. He had destroyed my entire family. I cried quietly in the hospital room, trying not to attract attention. I cried out of anger, frustration, and helplessness. How could a woman like me, who had built an empire out of nothing, who was respected throughout the region, be so fragile when it came to her own family? How had I allowed that man to poison my daughters against me like that? I was in the hospital for 3 more days, undergoing tests, taking medication to control my blood pressure, listening to doctors' recommendations to avoid stress, as if it were possible to avoid stress when your 3 daughters, one after another, fall for the charms of the same man who was once your husband, as if it were a choice to remain calm in the face of such perversity. When I was discharged, I returned to an empty house. No message, no call from the girls. Through employees, I found out that Rachel had quit her job at the store, saying she was going to work with her father. The final blow. My ally, my successor, was now on his side, helping to manage the stores he had gotten in the divorce. The empire I built was being used to finance the destruction of my family. I spent weeks in a state of near catatonia. I would go to work on autopilot, come home, barely eat, barely sleep. I lost so much weight that my clothes hung on my body like on a hanger. The older employees looked at me worriedly, but no one had the courage to bring up the subject. All of Malibu knew what had happened. The man who had dated his 3 stepdaughters, one after another, was now flaunting the youngest like a trophy, just as he had done with the others. And now you tell me, could you forgive daughters who fight with each other for the love of your ex-husband? I was devastated, but some people say I should get over it for the good of the family. What would you do in my place? Leave a comment, because I really want to know. Some people tell me that blood is blood, that a mother has to forgive everything. But is there forgiveness for a wound that deep? On a Sunday morning, alone at home while the rest of the city went to church, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste away. I wasn't going to give in to depression. I wasn't going to let Michael win like this. If he had a plan, I would have one too. If he was playing a dirty game with my daughters, I would find out what that game was and turn the tables. Not for revenge, although God forgive me. The idea of revenge was tempting, but to save my daughters, to open their eyes, to rescue what was left of my family. First, I needed to understand what was really going on. Why would Michael do this? Why seduce the 3 daughters one after another, creating such family chaos? There was something more behind it all, something I wasn't seeing, and I needed to find out what it was before it was too late, before he hurt my daughters even more, before he completely destroyed what I had spent a lifetime building. That same day, I wiped away my tears, looked at myself in the mirror, and promised myself, Patricia Morgan, you are a survivor. You built an empire from scratch at a time when women couldn't even have a bank account without their husband's permission. You are not going to let this man defeat you. You are going to fight for your daughters, for your business, for your dignity. And so, my own investigation began a search for the truth behind Michael's macabre endgame. What I would discover in the following months would be even worse than I imagined, but it would also be the key to finally freeing my family from Michael's clutches. Once the initial shock of discovering that Rachel, my youngest, my last hope, had fallen into the same trap as her sisters, I decided it was time to stop crying and start acting. Because let's face it, my heart might have been broken, but my head was still working perfectly. And I learned one thing in over 40 years of business in Malibu. When a customer comes back 3 times to look at the same piece of clothing, it's not because of the pretty pattern. There's something more behind it. Michael had seduced my 3 daughters, one after another. That wasn't a coincidence or passion, as he claimed. It was a pattern. It was calculated. It was a plan, and I was going to find out what that plan was, even if it was the last thing I did in my life. Because a mother can forgive almost anything, except someone who deliberately hurts her children. And that man was hurting my daughters in a way they hadn't even understood yet. I started thinking like a businesswoman, not a wounded mother. If this was a scam, what would the goal be? Money, of course. It had to be money. Michael had always been fascinated by money since the day I met him. I remembered how his eyes would sparkle when we closed the cash registers at the stores, how he loved counting the bills, stacking the coins, how he had insisted on taking care of the family finances from the beginning, always with the excuse that I had too much else to worry about. But how was he using my daughters to get money? They weren't rich on their own. What they had came from the divorce settlement when each of them got a small percentage of the stores and what they earned from working. It didn't make sense. Unless the ultimate target was me, my business, my assets, everything I built my entire life. Was he using my daughters to get to me? To get revenge for me kicking him out when I caught him with the secretary? I needed help to investigate. I couldn't do it alone. Michael knew me too well. He'd notice if I started asking questions around. I needed someone discreet, someone who knew the ins and outs of the business, someone Michael wouldn't suspect. That's when I remembered Jack. Jack Smith had been my right-hand man in the early years of the stores. He was a simple man who started out unloading trucks of merchandise and slowly worked his way up to become the manager of my first branch. When I got divorced, Michael fired him from the stores he got out of pure spite. He knew Jack was loyal to me. I immediately rehired him, but he ended up retiring a few years later when high blood pressure prevented him from working at the fast pace of retail anymore. I went to visit Jack on a Saturday afternoon, bringing a box of donuts that I knew he loved. He lived on a small ranch on the outskirts of Malibu, where he raised chickens and tended an impressive garden. His wife, Helen, greeted me with that tight hug that only country folk know how to give. "My goodness, Patricia, it's been a long time. What brings you out this way?" I explained that I needed to talk to Jack about a delicate matter, and she, as smart as she always was, left us alone on the porch with fresh coffee and the donuts I had brought. "Jack," I began, not quite sure how to explain the absurd situation. "Did you hear what's been happening with my daughters?" He lowered his eyes to his cup, embarrassed. "I heard something, Miss Morgan. Those city people are all gossips. I'm so sorry for you." I thanked him and got straight to the point. "I think something is wrong with this whole story. I don't believe it's just perversion on Michael's part. I think there's money involved, a lot of money, and I need your help to find out what's going on." Jack scratched his gray head, thinking, "You want me to investigate the stores he got? Because I haven't set foot in there since that guy kicked me out." I explained that no, I wanted something more discreet. For him to use his old contacts, employees who still worked there, suppliers, anyone who could give him information about Michael's business, what he was doing with the money, any suspicious movements. "You always said you didn't trust him," I reminded him. Jack gave a humorless smile. "And I wasn't wrong, was I, Miss Morgan? I always thought there was something wrong with the accounting he was doing, but I could never prove it. You trusted him too much." It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. And it was true. I had trusted him too much, been blind for too long. Jack agreed to help me. We arranged for him to be discreet, to make up excuses to contact old colleagues, a birthday, a fishing trip, a retiree's barbecue, nothing that would raise suspicion. I offered to pay him well for his time, but he refused. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm not helping for money, it's out of gratitude." He then leaned forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "Patricia," he said, dropping the formal Miss Morgan for the first time in years, "I watched you build everything from a single room. I saw you carry your babies in a bassinet in the back while you dealt with suppliers. That man. He never understood the steel in you. He only saw the gold. It would be my honor to help you remind him who you are." His words, so simple and so sincere, were the first real validation I'd felt in years. I left there with more than a lighter heart. I left with a renewed sense of my own worth, knowing that at least one person still saw the real me. I left there with a slightly lighter heart, knowing I was no longer alone in this battle. While Jack did his part, I started mine. First thing, I needed to get close to Marta, the oldest daughter, who had been the first to fall for Michael's charm and the first to be discarded. Of all of them, she was probably the most receptive, as she had personally experienced the humiliation of being replaced. I found out through acquaintances that she was working at a department store in the mall, a position far below what she had when she was managing one of the family's stores. Michael had fired her when they broke up. Another piece of the puzzle. I went to the mall at a time I knew it would be empty early on a Monday. I found Marta arranging a rack of clothes with deep dark circles under her eyes and hair that had lost its old shine. When she saw me, she nearly dropped the hangers. "Mom, what are you doing here?" There was no hostility in her voice, just surprise and a deep weariness. "I came to see my daughter," I replied simply. "Can we talk during your lunch break?" She hesitated, then nodded. We met in the food court 2 hours later. Marta ate in silence, avoiding my gaze. She seemed embarrassed, smaller somehow, as if she had shrunk within herself. I waited for her to finish before bringing up the subject. "Marta, I didn't come here to judge you or to say, 'I told you so.' I came because I'm your mother, and I'm worried, and because I think something is very wrong, something that goes beyond your relationship with him." She finally looked at me, her eyes welling up. "You don't know anything," she murmured. "I know more than you think," I replied. "I know that after you, he went after Lydia, and now he's with Rachel." Her eyes widened. "With Rachel? But he told me that he had stopped," she said, biting her lip. "What did he tell you, honey?" I asked gently. Marta took a deep breath. That he had realized he made a mistake with me, that he wanted to come back, that he was an idiot for leaving me. That was last week. He said he just needed to sort some things out, and he would come get me. A tear rolled down her face. I almost believed him again. My blood boiled. So that was his method. He kept all of them on a string, feeding them hope, manipulating them against one another. "Marta, I need you to be honest with me. During the time you were with him, did he ask you to sign any documents, transfer any money, anything related to finances?" She went pale. "How do you know about that?" "Bingo. So he did ask." "What was it, Marta? What did he make you sign?" She looked around as if afraid someone might be listening. Then she spoke quietly. "He said he was having problems with the IRS, that he needed to temporarily get some assets out of his name to avoid an unfair seizure. He convinced me to put the Pasadena store and 2 plots of land in my name. Then he convinced me to transfer everything to the name of a company he opened." "And your money?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. She lowered her eyes. "My savings. He said he had an incredible investment opportunity that would triple the value in 6 months. I put everything I had into it. I didn't need to ask if the money had come back. The answer was on Marta's haggard face, in her job as a saleswoman, in the simple clothes she wore. Before I could ask more, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and turned pale. "It's him," she whispered. I told her to answer it normally, and not to mention we were talking. She did, and I could hear Michael's sugary voice on the other end, saying he missed her, that he had a surprise for her, that he wanted to meet her that night. Marta, even after everything, blushed with pleasure at hearing those words. The power that man still had over her frightened me. After she hung up, her face was a canvas of confusion and hope. I held her hands. They were cold as ice. "Marta, listen to me. He's doing the same thing to your sisters. This isn't love. It's a game. And I believe it's for money. I need you to trust me." She pulled her hands away, a flicker of defiance in her tired eyes. "But you don't know what it's like, Mom. He makes me feel seen. What if you're wrong? What if I lose him because I listen to you? I'll be left with nothing." Her voice broke on the last word. It was then I saw the true depth of his poison. He hadn't just taken her money. He'd taken her self-worth. I softened my voice. "Honey, what if I'm right? What if the only thing you'll lose is an illusion? I'm not asking you to abandon him. I'm asking you to help me find the truth. For your sake, for your sisters, and for Aaliyah's. I let the silence hang in the air. She looked down at the table, then back at me, the spark of distrust for him finally overpowering her fear of being alone. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through her makeup. What do you want me to do? Continue acting normally. Let him think he still has you under his thumb. But pay attention to everything. Documents, conversations about money, any mention of your sisters or the stores, and tell me everything. She agreed, still reluctantly, but with a small spark of distrust lit in her eyes. It was a start. The following weeks were a period of intense investigation. Jack did his part, talking to former colleagues, gathering information, and observing the stores that now belonged to Michael. He discovered that 2 of them were practically bankrupt, with no inventory and employees who hadn't been paid in months. The third, the largest, had been sold recently for a price well below market value. Where had that money gone? No one could say. Marta cooperated as much as she could, reporting her meetings with Michael, the increasingly extravagant promises he made, always involving money, a wealthy future together, international travel, a house on the beach, and always accompanied by requests that she sign another power of attorney, lend her name to another business, or convince her grandmother, my mother, to put the ranch she had in the countryside in his name to avoid taxes. I tried to get close to Lydia as well, but it was more difficult. Still bitter about the end of the relationship, she blamed me for everything. She said that if I hadn't put ideas in Michael's head, they would still be together. Even so, through a mutual friend, I managed to find out that she, too, had signed documents, transferred properties, and invested all her savings in promising businesses that never paid off. The pattern was clear. Michael seduced my daughters one after another. He used emotional influence to convince them to transfer assets and money to him. And when he had nothing left to take, he would end the relationship in a humiliating way, usually involving another woman. Then, when they were at rock bottom, he would return with promises of a fresh start, keeping them emotionally dependent while he was already eyeing his next victim. Rachel was my biggest concern. As she was at the height of her relationship with Michael, she was the most vulnerable at that moment. Through Marta, who had re-established a cautious closeness with her youngest sister, I learned that Michael had already convinced Rachel to transfer her portion of one of the stores to him with the excuse of corporate reorganization and was pressuring her to put the apartment I had given her in his name as well. But the final blow, the last piece of the puzzle, came from where I least expected it. Aaliyah, my 4-year-old granddaughter, Marta's daughter from her first marriage, came to me one late afternoon, agitated and confused. "Grandma, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise you won't tell Mom." I promised, apprehensive about her state. Grandpa Michael, she had never stopped calling him that, even after all the scandals, has been sending me strange messages. At first, it was just, "How's school?" and things like that. Then he started complimenting my pictures on Instagram, saying I was turning into a very beautiful young woman. And yesterday, she pulled out her phone, her hands trembling, and showed me the last message. "When you turn 18, I have a special gift for you. Something that will change your life, but it has to be our little secret. Not even your mom can know." I felt sick. So, that was it? After going through the 3 daughters, Michael was already setting the stage to seduce my granddaughter too. It was sick, perverse on a level I could barely process. But at least now, I had concrete proof. The messages on Aaliyah's phone, which she agreed to let me photograph as long as I promised to protect her. With this new discovery, I contacted Jack immediately. He had more news. Through a contact at the bank, he discovered that Michael had opened an account in the Cayman Islands, to which he was transferring large sums of money. He was clearly preparing an escape, a luxurious retirement with the money he had extracted from my family over the years. Miss Morgan, from what we've gathered, he has already diverted more than $500,000 between the properties he put in his name, your daughter's savings, and what he sold of the stores he got in the divorce, Jack summarized, showing me the notes he had taken. And now he's got his eye on your main store, the most profitable of all. I heard he has an interested buyer. He's just waiting to get the paperwork. And how does he expect to get my store? I would never sell it to him, I questioned, perplexed. Jack looked at me seriously. From what I understand, his plan is to use Rachel, convince her to sue you for mismanagement of family assets, ask for an audit of the accounts, and create a legal mess that would force a liquidation of everything. With all 3 daughters against you in court, it would be difficult to win. It was a diabolical plan, but well thought out. No judge would side with a mother against 3 united daughters, especially if there were forged documents indicating irregularities. I could lose everything I had built in one go. And the worst part was, my daughters would be used as weapons against me and then discarded as they had been the other times. The urgency of the situation became even clearer when Marta came to me in a panic. "Mom, he's really pressuring Rachel." I heard them talking on the phone. He was talking about a lawsuit, about a meeting with a lawyer next week. "I think they're going to do something serious against you." I thanked her for the information and made my decision. It was time to act, and fast. The plan I devised was risky, but I saw no other way out. First, I needed to get my 3 daughters in the same place, away from Michael's influence. Then, I needed to show them with concrete evidence what he was really doing. If I could open their eyes to the manipulation, to the fact that he was using them for money, maybe I could not only save my assets but also win back my daughters. "How do you plan to get all 3 of them together?" "They barely talk to each other, and 2 of them don't even talk to you," Jack questioned when I explained my idea. I sighed, feeling the weight of what I was about to propose. "I'm going to use the one thing I know would bring them all here, the possibility of my death. It sounds extreme, I know. You might be thinking I'm a terrible mother for lying to my own daughters like that. But when you're fighting a monster, you can't play by ordinary rules. I had to use the one bond he hadn't managed to sever completely, a mother's love, as fragile a thread as it was. My plan was simple and drastic. To fake a serious health relapse, something that seemed terminal, and ask to see my daughters one last time. I knew that, no matter how hurt they were, none of them would have the courage to refuse a request from a mother supposedly on her deathbed. It was manipulative, yes, but I was fighting a master manipulator, and I had to use the weapons I had. First, I prepared the groundwork. I asked my doctor for a full checkup to ensure I was genuinely healthy. I didn't want to risk a real emotional shock. Then, with the help of a professional makeup artist, a niece of an employee who swore to secrecy, I learned to look sick. Deep, dark circles, paleness, a gaunt appearance. I bought a wheelchair and left it strategically in the living room. Slowly, I spread the news among acquaintances, knowing it would reach my daughter's ears. "Patricia isn't doing well, poor thing. The doctors are worried." At the same time, I prepared the evidence. With the help of Jack and a trusted accountant, I gathered documents that showed the diversion of money, the suspicious transfers, the forged documents. I got copies of the deeds that my daughters had signed, transferring properties to Michael's shell companies. I printed the disturbing messages he had sent to Aaliyah. I organized everything into folders, with clear annotations, so that anyone could understand the scale of the scam. The next step was the most difficult: convincing Marta to actively help with the plan. She was already cooperating with information, but I needed her to take a more active role, to convince her sisters to come to my deathbed. It was a painful conversation. "Honey, I know I'm asking you to lie to your sisters, and that's not right, but we're dealing with someone who doesn't play fair. If we don't act now, Michael will ruin all 3 of your lives, and maybe even Aaliyah's." I mentioned the messages he had sent to my granddaughter, and Marta turned pale. The idea that the man who had been her lover was now preying on her teenage daughter filled her with a deep disgust. "I'll do it, Mom. I'll call Lydia and Rachel. I'll tell them you're very sick and that you asked to see all 3 of them together. They'll come, I'm sure." And so it was. Marta called her sisters, crying real tears. I'm sure saying I had taken a sudden turn for the worse, that the doctors didn't have much hope, that my last wish was to see my 3 daughters together one last time. We scheduled it for a Sunday afternoon at the house where they all grew up, the house I kept in the divorce and still lived in. The scene was set. I was in bed, looking weak, thanks to the makeup, fake medications on the nightstand. a scarf covering my hair as if it had fallen out from some treatment. In the next room, hidden, were Jack, the accountant, and two trusted lawyers ready to enter at the right moment with all the evidence. The morning of the big day arrived, and I could barely control my nerves. What if they didn't come? What if Michael got suspicious and prevented Rachel from coming? What if, even with all the evidence, my daughters didn't believe me? So many things could go wrong, but it was my only chance to save my family, my assets, everything I had built with so much sacrifice. At 2 p.m., I heard the doorbell. Marta, who was already at the house helping me with the preparations, went to answer it. I heard voices in the hallway. Lydia had arrived, sounding worried and a little suspicious. Half an hour later, more voices. Rachel finally arrived, the last piece of the puzzle. Marta led them to my room, where I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. When the three of them walked in together, after so long, I didn't have to fake my emotions. The tears came naturally. There were my daughters, my greatest treasures, even with all the mistakes and hurts. Lydia looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. Rachel was visibly nervous, checking her phone every few minutes, probably Michael checking in. Only Marta seemed genuinely worried about me, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding my hand. My daughters, I began in a weak voice, part of the act. Thank you for coming. I know things have been complicated between us lately, but a mother always loves her daughters, no matter what. Lydia sniffled, her eyes welling up despite her resistance. Rachel remained tense, looking at her watch. It was now or never. Before I go, I need to share something with you, something I recently discovered that might change everything you think you know about Michael. Hearing his name, Rachel finally looked at me directly, a mix of surprise and defensiveness on her face. Mom, did you call us here to badmouth Dad again? I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. She made a move to get up, but Marta grabbed her arm. Rachel, please, Mom is sick. The least you can do is listen. Surprisingly, Lydia agreed. Let her talk, Rachel. We're already here. With a sigh, Rachel sat back down. I then took the remote control for the television that we had strategically installed in the room and pressed the button the signal for Jack and the others to enter. The door opened, and my daughters' expressions were a mix of total surprise and confusion when they saw the group of people carrying folders and documents. What is this, Mom? Who are these people? Lydia asked, confused. They are people who helped me discover the truth, I replied, sitting up in bed and removing the scarf from my head, revealing my perfectly normal hair. And no, I'm not dying, but you three are in danger, and this was the only way I could get you to listen to me. The initial confusion quickly gave way to indignation. Rachel was the most vocal. You lied to us? You faked being sick? This is sick, Mom. I raised my hand, asking for silence. Before you judge me, look at this. And then the accountant began to present the documents we had gathered, one by one. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, property deeds that had been moved from my daughters to Michael's shell companies, records of store sales below market value, and finally, the plan for the lawsuit that Michael was preparing, using Rachel as a front to take control of my remaining stores. Their reactions varied as the revelations accumulated. First, denial, especially from Rachel. This is a lie. He would never do that. Then doubt when the evidence became hard to refute. But he told me it was just temporary, that he would give everything back with a profit. And finally, when I showed them the messages he had sent to Aaliyah, absolute horror. He was hitting on my daughter, Marta almost screamed, her face red with rage. Aaliyah is only 14. He watched her grow up. He changed her diapers. Lydia, who had been more reserved until then, finally broke down in tears. He did the same thing to me. He asked me to transfer my apartment to his name. He said it was just for 6 months, and then he'd give it back to me with interest. I never saw my money again. I had to go back to renting. One by one, my daughters confirmed the pattern. Each had been manipulated, used, and discarded when they had nothing of value left to offer. And Rachel, the youngest, was about to lose the apartment I had given her, as well as being used as the central piece in a lawsuit that would destroy everything that was left of the family business. Rachel's resistance was the last to fall. But he loves me, she insisted, even in the face of all the evidence. He says I'm different from the others, that with me, it's real. It was Marta who responded with bitterness in her voice. He told me the exact same thing, Rachel, word for word, that I was special, that the others didn't understand him the way I did. It was all a lie. Lydia agreed. And when the money ran out, when there was nothing left for him to take, that call girl showed up in our apartment. I'm sure he planned the whole thing to end with me in a way that would humiliate me, that would leave me too devastated to think straight, to question where all my money had gone. As my daughters compared notes, realizing they had been victims of the same scam, I presented the final piece of the puzzle, the account in the Cayman Islands, where Michael was sending all the money he had extracted from them. He's planning to flee, I explained. As soon as he gets what he wants from Rachel, as soon as he uses her to sue me and take my remaining stores, he's going to disappear with all the money, and all three of you will be left with nothing. Rachel, who had been the most resistant until now, finally broke. She took out her phone and showed us the dozens of messages from Michael asking, "How is it going? Did your mom sign anything yet? Remember our plan." There wasn't a single word of genuine affection, of real concern. It was all about money, about the scam, about using Rachel as a tool. "I'm such an idiot," she sobbed, her face in her hands. "He never loved me. He never loved any of us." Marta and Lydia moved closer, hugging their youngest sister for the first time in years. It was a scene I will never forget. My three daughters, reunited by a shared suffering, finally understanding the extent of the manipulation they had endured. When the emotions calmed down a bit, I presented the second part of my plan. Now that you know the truth, we have a choice to make. We can simply cut ties with him and try to recover what we can legally, which could take years with no guarantee of success. Or, I paused, looking at each of them, we can give Michael a taste of his own medicine. We can make him feel his own poison. The three of them looked at me, curious and apprehensive. "What do you have in mind, Mom?" Lydia asked. I smiled for the first time, feeling that I had my daughters back. A plan that will make Michael reveal his true intentions, that will catch him red-handed, that will not only allow us to recover what he stole but also ensure he can never do this to anyone else again. I explained the plan in detail with the help of Jack and the lawyers. It was risky. It would require all of us to act perfectly, especially Rachel, who would have the most difficult role, continuing to pretend to be under Michael's control while, in reality, she would be setting a trap for him. "Do you think you can do this?" I asked at the end, looking at each of my daughters. "Do you think you can pretend for a few more weeks until we have everything prepared?" The three of them looked at each other, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. That special connection they had always had since they were little, that silent understanding that only very close sisters develop. "Yes, we can, Mom," Marta replied, speaking for all of them. "We've already been pretending for too long, haven't we? Pretending that he cared about us, pretending that what we had was love, pretending a little longer, now that we know the truth, will even be a relief." Lydia agreed, wiping away her tears. "I want my money back. I want my apartment back. And I want to see the look on his face when he realizes the tables have turned." Rachel, still shaken, but visibly stronger, finished. "And I want to make sure he can never do this to another woman again, let alone my niece." And so we sealed our pact, mother and daughters united again, not by the love of a man, but by the desire for justice, by the need to recover not only material possessions but also the dignity he had stolen from all of us. We hugged each other, cried together, and began to plan every detail of the operation that we hoped would put an end to Michael's reign of terror. I bet you don't have the courage to give this video a thumbs up after hearing something so absurd, right? But if you think I was right to set this trap, instead of just accepting my fate, show me with a like. I want to see if you're as strong as I had to be. Because, you see, some people say I should have just let it go, that I should have accepted defeat, that it was better to move on and forgive. But I ask you, what mother would see her daughters being manipulated like this and do nothing? What woman would allow a con artist to get away with destroying her family? From that Sunday on, nothing would ever be the same. The plan was laid out, the roles were assigned, and the trap was being prepared. Michael, who thought he had 3 women in the palm of his hand, who boasted about having deceived all of us, who planned to flee with millions while leaving a trail of destruction behind, had no idea what was waiting for him. He didn't know that he had underestimated the strength of a mother defending her children, the determination of a woman who built an empire from scratch, the unity of 4 women who had finally opened their eyes to the manipulation they had suffered. What would happen in the following weeks would change our lives forever. And I guarantee one thing. Michael would never look at a woman the same way again after tasting his own poison. In the weeks following our family pact, we worked day and night preparing the perfect trap. Each daughter had her role, and mine was the most difficult, pretending to be still weak and sick, while, in reality, I had never been more alert in my life. We had to act fast before Michael could convince Rachel to sign the documents for the lawsuit against me, before he could divert even more money abroad, before he realized we were united again. The plan was seemingly simple. Rachel would continue to pretend to be under his control, saying I had gotten worse after the 3 of them visited, that I was too weak to even sign documents. This would buy us time. Meanwhile, Marta and Lydia would cautiously get closer, as if they were worried about my health but still too resentful for a complete reconciliation. And I would be the bait, the fragile, dying woman, ready to make peace with the world and sign any paper they put in front of me. Will he believe it? Lydia questioned in one of our secret meetings, always held at Jack's house to avoid suspicion. Michael is smart. He'll be suspicious of this sudden change. That's why we have to go slowly, Marta replied. We can't all of a sudden become best friends. We need to maintain some tension between us, to seem like we're still hurt, only uniting because of Mom's illness. Rachel, who had the most difficult role, bit her lip nervously. Yesterday, he asked again about the lawsuit papers. He said I had put it off for too long, that I needed to convince Mom to sign a power of attorney while she was still of sound mind. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. He said that if I truly loved him, I would do this for us, for our future. My blood boiled when I heard that. Even knowing it was manipulation, even understanding the game, it was hard to hear how he used my daughter's love as a weapon against them. And what did you say, honey? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I said I'm trying, but that you've been very confused, that sometimes you don't even recognize me. He seemed to believe it. He even suggested that maybe we need to consider an institutional stay. She swallowed hard. To make things easier. According to him, it was worse than we thought. Michael wasn't just planning to sue me. He was considering having me institutionalized, probably in some clinic where I would be isolated, without access to family or lawyers, while he plundered what was left of the family assets. The urgency of our plan became even clearer. We need something concrete, something irrefutable, said the lawyer who was helping us, Mr. Douglas. A serious, middle-aged man who had an old rivalry with Michael. Documents are good, but they can be challenged. We need to catch him confessing in his own words, and so we refined the plan. We would set up a scene where Michael would feel comfortable enough to reveal his true intentions, a scene where he would let his guard down, where his greed would speak louder than his caution, and we would record everything with professional equipment, leaving no room for later questions. The chosen location was my house, the same place where we had met before. But this time, we would install hidden cameras in strategic spots. Sensitive microphones would capture every word, and in an adjacent room, connected by a discreet monitoring system, would be Jack, the lawyers, and a police officer, Mr. Plows. Douglas knew, a serious and incorruptible woman who would not hesitate to act upon seeing evidence of a crime. The date was set for a Sunday, 2 weeks after our initial meeting. Enough time to install the equipment, for Rachel to plant the seed in Michael's head, for everything to seem natural. She would convince him to come to my house under the pretext that I was so sick that I had finally agreed to sign the power of attorney he wanted so badly, the one that would give him total control over my assets. When the big day arrived, I could barely control my nerves. What if he got suspicious? What if he saw through the trap? What if, even worse, he found out the girls were collaborating with me and took it out on them later? So many things could go wrong, but we had no choice. It was our only chance to catch that man who had destroyed our family, to get back what he had stolen, to prevent him from making more victims. Everything started as planned. Rachel arrived first around 2 p.m., acting nervous and worried for the cameras that were already recording. "Mom, I brought some medicine you asked for," she said loudly, the cue we had agreed upon to indicate that Michael would be right behind her. I played my part as the sick mother to perfection. An old robe, disheveled hair, dark circles enhanced with makeup, a weak and trembling voice. "Thank you, honey. Help me sit up. I'm so weak today." She settled me into the living room armchair, covered my legs with a blanket, and brought me a glass of water. The perfect enactment of a devoted daughter caring for her dying mother. Marta arrived half an hour later, playing the role of the worried but still distant daughter. "How are you today?" she asked formally, maintaining a calculated distance. She had brought flowers, an extra touch we hadn't planned, but that added even more authenticity to the scene. Lydia was the last to arrive, just before the time set with Michael. Her performance was the most difficult. She needed to seem still hurt by me, still under Michael's influence, but worried enough about my health to be present. "Are the nurses coming today?" she asked without looking me in the eyes, pretending to examine the medicines on the side table. "No, honey. Today's Sunday," I replied in a weak voice. "They only come on weekdays." It was all part of the scene we were building. A sick, semi-abandoned old woman, dependent on the sporadic care of daughters who barely spoke to each other. The perfect target for a predator like Michael. When the doorbell rang, we all froze for a second. It was him. Rachel took a deep breath, assuming her most important role. "I'll get it," she said, going to the door. We heard voices in the hallway. Hers was forced and cheerful, his was sugary and fake. And then he came into the living room, all smiles, carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers that he had probably bought with money he had stolen from us. "Patricia, how are you?" he asked with feigned concern, approaching for a kiss on the cheek that made me feel sick. "The girls told me you weren't doing well. I was so worried. I had to swallow the bile that rose in my throat. This man, who was planning to strip me of everything, who had manipulated my daughters, who had sent inappropriate messages to my teenage granddaughter, was now here, pretending to be concerned, playing the role of the attentive ex-husband. The urge was to rub all the evidence we had in his face, to scream all the truths, to kick him out of my house. But the plan required patience. We needed him to feel safe, confident, to completely let his guard down. "Michael," I replied in a weak voice. "What a surprise. I wasn't expecting you today." I coughed lightly, a theatrical touch. "Did the girls call you?" He looked quickly at Rachel, then back at me. "Yes. Rachel called me and said you wanted to take care of some pending matters, get the paperwork in order while you still can." His smile wavered a bit, as if he was trying to look sad at the prospect of my imminent death, but couldn't completely hide his eagerness to get his hands on the papers. I nodded slowly. "It's true. I don't want to leave anything messy for the girls after I'm gone." I looked at my daughters, one by one, with what I hoped was an expression of maternal love mixed with resignation. They've already suffered so much. They at least deserve a peaceful transition. Michael pulled up a chair and sat close to me, near enough for the microphones to pick up every word. "That's very wise of you, Patricia, and generous, too." He opened the folder he was carrying and took out some documents. "I brought some powers of attorney that will make everything easier. With this, Rachel can take care of the entire process without having to bother you with annoying details about notaries, banks, and all that." I extended a hand trembling with contained rage, not weakness, and took the papers. They were exactly what we had expected. Broad powers of attorney that would give Rachel, or rather, Michael using Rachel as a front, the authority to sell properties, close accounts, and transfer funds, essentially liquidating everything I owned. It was the final blow of his plan, and it was documented right there, being recorded by the strategically positioned cameras and microphones. "It seems so complicated," I murmured, looking at the papers with a confused expression. So many pages, so much fine print. I raised my eyes to him. Are you sure it's just a normal power of attorney? It looks like I'm signing over everything I have. I saw a flash of irritation in his eyes, quickly masked. What are you talking about, Patricia? It's just the standard model, a bit wordy like these legal documents always are. Basically, it authorizes Rachel to take care of your business while you focus on getting better. He forced a comforting smile. It's for your own good. At that moment, Marta intervened as planned. Can I take a look, Mom? Not that I don't trust Michael. She stumbled a little on his name. But it's always good to have a second pair of eyes, right? She reached for the documents. Michael reacted too quickly, practically snatching the papers out of my hand before Marta could get them. You don't need to worry about that, Marta. These are matters between your mother and your sister. You have your own problems to deal with, don't you? The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Lydia, who had been quietly observing from a corner until then, moved closer. What's the hurry, Michael? If it's just a simple power of attorney, what's the harm in us taking a look? He smiled, but it was a tense, forced smile. No harm, of course. I'm just trying not to tire your mother out with bureaucracy. She's clearly not well. He turned to me, shifting to a softer tone. Patricia, why don't we just sign this so you can rest? I'm sure all this talk about documents is tiring you out. It was time to push a little harder, to provoke him into showing his true colors. Actually, I said slowly, I'm feeling a little better today. Maybe we should leave this for another day, when I can read it more carefully. The mask fell for an instant. I clearly saw the anger, the frustration, the cold calculation in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself. Patricia, the doctors said you might have episodes of confusion, moments of clarity followed by relapses. It's better to take advantage of the fact that you're lucid now to get this done. He pressed a pen into my hand. Just sign where it's marked. Trust me. Rachel, playing her part perfectly, intervened. Dad, maybe it really is better to leave it for another day. Mom seems tired. She gave me a perfectly calculated, concerned look that appeared genuine. Michael didn't hide his irritation this time. Rachel, we've already talked about this. Your mother may not have another opportunity. Do you want her to go leaving everything in a mess? Do you want to face years of probate, lawyers, and bureaucracy? He lowered his voice, but not enough for the microphones not to pick it up. Do you want to give up everything we planned? The atmosphere became even more strained. My daughters exchanged glances, feigning discomfort but in fact perfectly following the script we had rehearsed. It was time to increase the pressure, to make him show more of his true intentions. What plans are these, Michael? I asked with a feigned innocence. Are you planning something for after I'm gone? He hesitated, clearly calculating the safest answer. Only the best for your daughters, Patricia. To make sure they're okay, that the assets you built stay in the family. In the family? I repeated slowly. Or in your accounts in the Cayman Islands? The shock on his face was priceless. For a second, he seemed completely lost, his mouth agape in genuine astonishment. But he quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. What are you talking about? What accounts? I think the mental confusion is getting worse, Patricia. Maybe we need to consider an institutional stay, as we discussed, Rachel. It was the moment we had been waiting for. The mention of institutionalization, the denial of the offshore accounts for which we had concrete evidence, the explicit manipulation, but we still needed more, a clear and unequivocal confession. And for that, we needed the element of surprise we had prepared. The doorbell rang, making Michael jump slightly in his chair. Are we expecting someone else? He asked, looking at Rachel with suspicion. It must be Aaliyah, Marta replied naturally. She said she was coming to see Grandma today. The mention of my granddaughter, Michael's next target, clearly made him uncomfortable. He adjusted his tie, ran a hand through his hair, nervous gestures that didn't match his usual confidence. And then Aaliyah walked into the room. My beautiful 7-year-old granddaughter with her phone at the ready, for her own part in this carefully orchestrated play. Grandma, she exclaimed, coming to hug me. Then she turned and, feigning surprise, greeted Michael. Hi, Grandpa Michael. I didn't know you would be here. His discomfort was palpable, Hello, Aaliyah. How is school? He avoided looking directly at her, clearly aware of the inappropriate messages he had sent, worried she might have shown them to someone. It's going well, she replied with a studied cheerfulness. Speaking of which, I got your message about that special gift when I turn 18. I'm super curious, she smiled innocently, but her eyes were as sharp as a hunter's. What is it? Can you give me a hint? Michael's face visibly paled. He looked quickly at Marta, then at me, clearly assessing if we knew about the messages. Oh, that was just a joke, Aaliyah. Nothing important. He tried to change the subject. Patricia, about these documents? But Aaliyah, following the script perfectly, insisted. But on WhatsApp, you said it was something that would change my life, something that not even my mom could know. She took out her phone. Look, I'll read it to you. No, Michael almost shouted, standing up abruptly. That's a misunderstanding, Aaliyah. Put that phone away. Marta, feigning confusion, approached her daughter. What messages are those? Let me see, honey. She took the phone, scrolled through the screen a few times, and then her face turned into a mask of horror. She didn't have to fake it, for even knowing the content, seeing the messages was revolting. Michael, what is this? When you turn 18, let's meet up without your mom knowing. You're turning into a beautiful young woman, even prettier than your mom at your age? She looked up, her eyes furious. You were hitting on my daughter? Your step-granddaughter? The room exploded into controlled chaos, exactly as we had planned. Lydia snatched the phone from Marta's hands, read the messages, and started yelling at Michael. Rachel, feigning shock and betrayal, retreated to a corner, tears in her eyes. Aaliyah, perfectly protected by the circle of adult women, watched everything with a mix of disgust and satisfaction as she saw the predator cornered. Michael tried to defend himself, denying, minimizing, accusing Aaliyah of misinterpreting innocent messages, trying to make Marta seem hysterical and exaggerated, but he was clearly cornered. His usual confidence was replaced by the growing panic of a man who sees his game being discovered. In the middle of that calculated confusion, his phone rang. He answered quickly, probably grateful for the interruption. I can't talk right now, he said tensely, and then he made the mistake we were waiting for. I'm in the middle of something here at Patricia's house. Things are complicated. It was our cue. All of us, as we had agreed, pretended to need to leave the room at the same time. Marta taking Aaliyah to calm down, Lydia going to get water, Rachel leaving to take an urgent call. In seconds, we left Michael alone with me, or at least that's what he thought. As soon as we were alone, he let out a sigh of relief. What a nightmare. Your daughters have always been unbalanced, just like their mother. He moved closer, his voice suddenly harder, his face transformed. There was no longer any need to pretend kindness or concern. Now sign this damn thing before they come back. I've already wasted too much time on you and your hysterical little girls. I remained calm, the recorder hidden in the sleeve of my robe, capturing every word. Why the rush, Michael? What do you get out of this? He laughed, a cold laugh I had never heard before. What do I get out of it? Everything, Patricia. Everything you built. Everything that should have been mine from the beginning. You think I put up with being married to you for all those years for what? For love? He made a face of contempt. It was for the money, it always was. And when you caught me with Julia and kicked me out, I swore that one day I would get everything back, and with interest. The girls. I began, wanting him to say more, to completely incriminate himself. Your daughters? He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. They were even easier to manipulate than you were, pathetically desperate for a man's attention, any man's. All it took was a few cheap compliments about their eyes or their business sense, and they were putty in my hands, ready to sign anything, transfer any amount, just for a pat on the head. Marta, the sentimental fool, cried with gratitude when I told her she was the love of my life. Lydia, so full of fire, was tamed with a few designer handbags she thought it was love. I thought of it as a business expense. And Rachel, my clever Rachel, she really thought she was different, that she was my intellectual equal. That was the most amusing part of all, watching her fall for the exact same lines that worked on her less intelligent sisters. Each of his words was like a knife, even though I knew it was all true, even though I had discovered everything before. Hearing him confess with that perverse pleasure, the way he had used my daughters, was almost unbearable. But I had to continue. I had to extract everything. And the money? What did you do with everything you took from them? He shrugged as if it were obvious. Offshore, of course. I have accounts in the Cayman Islands that not even the best accountant could track. More than $500,000 so far. And that's just the beginning. When I'm done, when I get what's left of your stores through this power of attorney, I'll have more than enough to disappear. Maybe Thailand or the Philippines, somewhere where money goes far and no one asks questions about a rich American guy. And my daughters? What happens to them afterward? He laughed again, that cold laugh that gave me chills. Who cares? They've already served their purpose. Maybe I'll take Rachel with me for a while, until I get bored. Or maybe Aaliyah, when she turns 18. I've always liked fresher meat. He paused, observing my horrified expression. Don't look at me like that, Patricia. Business is business. You humiliated me, kicked me out like a dog. This is just poetic justice. At that moment, my phone rang, the agreed-upon signal. I answered, speaking loud enough for him to hear. Yes, we're in the living room. You can come in. I hung up and looked at Michael, who seemed confused. Who was that? He asked, his arrogance giving way to suspicion. The police, I replied simply, sitting up straighter and dropping the fragile, sick persona. They heard everything, Michael. Every word of your confession. At that moment, the door opened. My 3 daughters came in first, followed by Jack, Mr. Douglas, the police officer, and finally, 2 uniformed cops. Michael's expression went from shock to panic in seconds. What is this? What are you talking about? He looked at Rachel, betrayal in his eyes. You betrayed me after everything I promised you? Rachel took a step forward, her chin up, her voice firm for the first time in a long time. You're the one who betrayed us, Dad. All of us. You used our love, our trust, to steal everything we had, and you even planned to do the same to Aaliyah. She shook her head in disgust. But it's over. Your game is over. The police officers approached, one of them taking out his handcuffs. Michael Jones, you are under arrest for the crimes of fraud, embezzlement, document forgery, and attempted extortion by fraud. The officer recited his rights while putting on the handcuffs, but Michael barely seemed to hear, looking frantically around like a cornered animal. This is absurd. There's no proof of anything. He tried to struggle, but the officer held him firm. It's your word against theirs. Mr. Douglas stepped forward, a thin smile on his lips. Actually, we have quite a bit of concrete evidence, Mr. Jones. Audio and video recordings of your full confession. Forged documents with your signature, records of offshore accounts, inappropriate messages sent to a minor. He paused, savoring the moment. You're going to spend a long time in jail. As the police officers led him away, Michael tried one last gambit. He looked at my daughters one by one, with those eyes that had deceived them so many times. Are you really going to do this to me after everything we've been through together? Marta, Lydia, Rachel, you know I love you. This is all a misunderstanding. My daughters said nothing, just stood side by side, a wall of determination and newfound dignity. It was Aaliyah who responded with a maturity that filled me with pride. Enough with the manipulation, Grandpa. No one here believes your lies anymore. And so he was led away, still protesting, still trying to manipulate, still unable to believe that he had been caught. The man who had made lying an art form, who had almost destroyed our family out of pure greed, would finally face the consequences of his actions. Watching him being led away in handcuffs, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. Instead, there was this strange, hollow emptiness. We had won, but at what cost? Looking at my 3 daughters, broken but standing together, I knew our real fight had just begun. The fight to heal. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The case went to trial quickly, thanks to the irrefutable evidence we had gathered. Michael tried every possible maneuver. He claimed he had been set up, that we had conspired against him, that the recordings had been edited, but the evidence was overwhelming. The offshore accounts were located and frozen. The forged documents were attached to the case. The messages to Aaliyah, although not constituting a crime because he had carefully never been explicit enough, demonstrated his manipulative and predatory character. The trial lasted only 3 days. Michael was sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, document forgery, and attempted extortion by fraud. But the most satisfying part of the sentence came when the judge, who by coincidence had attended the same church as me for years, ordered an additional alternative penalty. After serving 4 years in a secure facility, Michael would have to perform community service 3 times a week, specifically cleaning the plaza in front of my stores. The poetic justice you mentioned in your recorded confession, Mr. Jones, the judge said with biting irony, will be applied. You will spend the next few years seeing every day the empire you tried to steal, reminding yourself of what you lost because of your greed. When the sentence was read, I looked at my daughters, all seated beside me in the front row of the courtroom. We were together again, united not by the love of a man, but by the love among us, by the truth finally revealed, by justice finally served. It was not an easy road. Each of them still carried deep emotional scars from the manipulation they had suffered, but we were healing together, rebuilding our family piece by piece. The money Michael had diverted was recovered almost in its entirety, thanks to the quick freezing of the offshore accounts. The properties that had been fraudulently transferred were returned to their rightful owners, my daughters, who now had a much better understanding of the value of what they owned and how to protect it. In the weeks that followed the trial, we received support from unexpected places. Other women started coming forward. Michael's ex-girlfriends who had gone through similar situations but never had the courage or sufficient evidence to report him. We discovered that the pattern of manipulation and theft had been going on for much longer, that we were just the most recent victims of a man who had made deception his way of life. Many people criticize me for setting this trap for the father of my daughters. They say I should have just reported him, and that's it. But I needed my daughters to see with their own eyes who he really was. Do you think I went too far with this trap? Or would you have done the same in my place? Tell me what you think in the comments, because you see, it wasn't just a matter of justice for me, it was a matter of liberation for my daughters. They needed to see Michael's true face, to hear from his own mouth how he saw them, how he had used them. Only then could they completely free themselves from the emotional manipulation they had suffered, and liberation was exactly what we achieved. Marta, after years of working in jobs below her capabilities, finally returned to managing one of the family stores, the one in Santa Monica, which had been her favorite since she was young. Lydia, who always had a talent for fashion, started a clothing line using our own fabrics, bringing a modernization the business needed. And Rachel, my youngest, finished her business administration degree and took over the financial side of the group, implementing controls that would ensure no one could ever divert a single penny again. Aaliyah, my courageous granddaughter, who played a fundamental role in Michael's downfall, decided to study law, inspired by the experience. I want to protect other women, Grandma, she told me with that determination typical of youth. I want to make sure no family has to go through what we did. As for me, well, I could finally do what I had been putting off for so long. I gradually began to step away from the day-to-day business, trusting my daughters more and more. It wasn't easy. After decades at the helm, delegating is a huge challenge. But seeing those 3 strong, intelligent, and now united women, taking the reins of what I built, filled me with a pride that words cannot describe. The first time I saw Michael serving his alternative sentence, sweeping the plaza in front of the main store, I confess I felt a satisfaction that might not be very Christian. He was thinner, older. The charm that had once captivated me was completely gone. When our eyes met, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before: shame. He quickly looked away, concentrating on the broom and the dry leaves he was trying to gather on a particularly windy day. A perfect metaphor for how he tried to gather a fortune that was now scattering far from his reach. I didn't speak to him that day, or on the days that followed when I saw him doing the same work. There was nothing to say. Justice was being served in the most poetic way possible. The man who wanted to steal everything I built was now cleaning the sidewalk of my empire. While I watched from the window of the office, he once wanted to usurp. People sometimes ask me if I managed to forgive Michael. It's a complicated question. Forgive the harm he did to me? Maybe. With time, the anger fades and the pain turns into a lesson learned. But to forgive what he did to my daughters, how he manipulated, used, and discarded each of them, how he almost destroyed the most precious bonds in my life, that's harder, much harder. What I know for sure is that we won. Not just in court, not just by getting the money and properties back, but in a much deeper and more meaningful way. We won because our family survived, because those 3 girls I saw grow up, who I saw distance themselves from me and from each other because of the manipulation of an unscrupulous man, were now together again, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. On a Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, we were all gathered on the porch of my house. Myself, my 3 daughters, my granddaughter, even my 7-year-old mother who had come to stay with us for a while. It was the first time in years that we had all been able to be together, without tension, without unspoken grudges, without the ghost of Michael hanging over us. As I watched those women talking, laughing, sharing stories and plans for the future, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The family I almost lost was there, whole again, healed, or at least on the path to full healing. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Marta asked, noticing my contemplative silence. I smiled, looking at each of those faces I loved so much. I'm thinking that some battles, no matter how painful, are worth every scar they leave. And as the sun set, painting the Malibu sky with shades of orange and pink, I played with the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, all that suffering had a purpose. Maybe we needed to go through that hell to find a strength we didn't know we had, to rebuild bonds that were fragile long before Michael came into our lives, to value what truly matters, the family we built, the women we became, the story we continue to write together. And if someone were to ask me if I would do it all over again, the trap, the confrontation, the painful process of exposing the whole truth, my answer would be an unhesitating yes, because sometimes justice needs to be sought with our own hands. Some wounds can only be healed when exposed to the light, and some families only find their true strength when they face their worst nightmare together. The victory in court was just the beginning of our journey of rebuilding. Having Michael behind bars, prevented from continuing his trail of destruction, brought immense relief. But it also left us with deep wounds that we needed to confront. We won the legal battle, but the emotional war was far from over. How do you rebuild trust after so much betrayal? How do you look into each other's eyes without feeling shame or guilt for what happened? In the first few months after the trial, the situation at home was strange. My daughters had started visiting me regularly again. We had gone through the trauma of the public exposure of the case together, but there was still a palpable discomfort in the air. Conversations would stop when I walked into the room. Gazes would be averted. Subjects would be avoided. We were all walking on eggshells, afraid to touch the still open wounds. It was Marta, always the most practical of the 3, who suggested what would become our salvation. "Mom, I think we need professional help, all of us together." I confess I resisted at first. Women of my generation, raised in the American West, weren't taught to air their dirty laundry with strangers. "Family problems are solved within the family," is what my mother always used to say. But my daughters insisted, and deep down, I knew they were right. What we went through wasn't a common problem that could be solved with coffee on the porch and a few mumbled apologies. We found Dr. Victoria, a family therapist with experience in cases of manipulation and psychological abuse. In the first few sessions, we could barely look at each other. Lydia cried all the time. Rachel barely spoke. Marta talked too much, anxious to fill the awkward silences. I felt out of place, an intruder in my own daughter's pain. But Dr. Victoria had the patience of a saint and a wisdom that only years of practice can provide. "You're here because you chose to be," she would remind us at the beginning of each session. "Because you chose to rebuild, not because you're obligated. That's already a victory." Slowly, the floodgates opened. Marta was the first to speak openly about how she felt dirty and stupid for having fallen for Michael's scam. "The worst part wasn't the money I lost. she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. It was realizing how easily I was manipulated. How I believed he truly loved me when all he really wanted was to use my name on the documents. Lydia, always the most explosive, confronted her sisters. How could you two date the man who was my stepfather, who raised us? Did you never find that disgusting? The question landed like a bomb in the room, but it was necessary. Rachel explained through tears how Michael had distorted everything. He would say he wasn't our real father, that he was younger than Mom, and that it was natural to feel attraction. And we wanted to believe it so badly. We wanted his attention so much. The most difficult sessions were the ones where we had to talk about the competition he created between them, how he fueled jealousy, insecurities, and comparisons. He always said I was smarter than you two, Rachel admitted, embarrassed, that you had been easy to manipulate, but that I was special. Marta and Lydia admitted to having heard variations of the same lie, each believing she was the chosen one, the special one, while the others were disposable. And I had to face my own guilt. The guilt of not having noticed what was happening sooner, of having been so focused on work that I didn't see the signs of manipulation, of having chosen that man to be the father of my daughters. I feel responsible for everything, I confessed in a particularly difficult session. If I hadn't fallen for him, if I had been more attentive, you were also a victim, Mom, Lydia interrupted to my surprise. She, who had always been the harshest with me, the one who most blamed me for the divorce, now looked at me with a compassion I hadn't seen in years. He fooled all of us, including you. It was the first moment of true reconnection, a tearful hug between a mother and daughter who had been distant for so long. In the following months, more moments like that happened. Tears, painful confessions, pleas for forgiveness, promises of a new beginning. It wasn't a linear process. There were relapses, heated arguments, old resentments resurfacing, but each session brought us a little closer to each other, a little farther away from the toxic influence Michael had exerted over us. Dr. Victoria taught us nonviolent communication techniques, helped us establish healthy boundaries, and to recognize patterns of manipulation so we would never fall for them again. You're not just survivors, she would say. You're warriors who can use this experience to become stronger. And that's exactly what we did. After almost a year of intensive therapy, we began to apply what we had learned not only in our family relationships, but also in our business. The Patricia Morgan stores, which had been the target of Michael's greed, would now become the symbol of our rebuilding. On a Saturday afternoon, after closing the main store in Malibu, I gathered them for a meeting I had been rehearsing for weeks. I spread architectural plans, financial reports, and market projections on the large conference table. I'm 77 years old, I began, looking into the eyes of each of them. I built this business from scratch. I faced prejudice for being a woman entrepreneur in a time when that was almost a bad word. I survived a divorce, betrayals, and attempts to steal everything from me. And now I want to do the most difficult thing of all. Pass the torch. They looked at me, surprised. Despite all of them having worked in the stores since their teens, I had always maintained absolute control, always had the final say in all decisions. It was time to change that. Each of you has unique talents, different passions. Instead of forcing yourselves to be like me, I want you to use the best of what you have to take this business to places I never could have imagined. And so we began the complete restructuring of the Patricia Morgan stores. Marta, with her keen eye for numbers and market trends, took over the strategic and financial side. Lydia, creative and in tune with fashion, became responsible for product curation, completely revamping our fabric catalog to include more sustainable and contemporary options. Rachel, with her business administration background and natural ability to deal with people, took over team management and expansion. It wasn't a transition without conflict, of course. We sometimes clashed, disagreed on directions to take, resurrected old problematic dynamics. But we had learned one thing from that whole traumatic experience: the importance of honest communication. When we felt the tension rising, we would stop, breathe, and use the techniques Dr. Victoria had taught us. I'm feeling invalidated when you interrupt my presentation, Lydia would say to Marta instead of exploding as she would have before. I understand your point, but I disagree because I have data that suggests a different approach. Rachel would respond to me. Instead of just shutting down in resentment, we established a tradition that we maintain to this day. Every Monday at 8 a.m., we meet for the family council. It's not just a business meeting, although we do discuss numbers, strategies, and challenges. It's a sacred space where we connect as a family, where we bring not only spreadsheets but also personal concerns, celebrations, and doubts. We always start with an emotional check-in. How are you really feeling today? It's a simple question, but one that opens up space for vulnerabilities, for that humanity that is so often forgotten in the world of business. The results were not long in coming. In 2 years, we had already expanded from 5 to 8 stores, with units in cities where we had never operated before. Palm Springs, San Diego, even an experimental store in Santa Barbara, our first step beyond the Los Angeles area. Our revenue doubled not just from physical expansion, but from a complete reinvention of the business model. Lydia had the idea that revolutionized everything. Instead of just being a traditional fabric store, we started offering sewing, embroidery, and design workshops for the local community. We don't just sell fabrics, she would explain in our meetings. We sell possibilities. We sell financial independence for women who can turn a yard of cotton into a livelihood for their families. The workshops were an instant success, especially when we started focusing on women in vulnerable situations, single mothers, widows, women leaving abusive relationships. They all found in the Patricia Morgan stores not only materials, but also knowledge, community, and opportunity. Rachel, always the most sensitive to social issues, implemented a microloan program that allowed students of our workshops to buy sewing machines with 0 interest, paying them off as they began to generate income. We're creating an army of financially independent women, she would say with that sparkle in her eyes that reminded me so much of myself in my youth. Women who will never be forced to stay in bad situations because of financial dependence. The expansion continued at a rapid pace in the following years. From 8 stores, we jumped to 12-inch just 5 years after Michael's trial. Each new unit had its own personality, reflecting the characteristics of the daughter who supervised it more directly, but all shared the same DNA. They were spaces of empowerment, not just commerce. One decision we made together that proved to be fundamental to our mission was to prioritize hiring women who had gone through similar situations as ours. Women who had been manipulated, deceived, who had lost money or self-esteem to unscrupulous men. At first, this policy arose naturally. A friend of Marta's who had been a victim of a financial scam, an acquaintance of Lydia's who was rebuilding her life after a devastating divorce. But we soon noticed the pattern and formalized it. These women have a resilience that you can't learn in any course, I would explain to the few who questioned our approach. And more importantly, they recognize a manipulator from a mile away. We will never be fooled again. Our team became known throughout the state as a group of strong, determined women, united by stories of overcoming adversity. Customers came from far away, not just for the quality fabrics, but for the energy they felt when they entered our stores. "You can breathe feminine strength here," a customer from San Diego once commented, and the phrase ended up becoming our unofficial slogan. Behind the scenes, our family continued the healing process. The sessions with Dr. Victoria became less frequent, but we never completely abandoned therapy. Some traumas are like scars that, even when healed, still ache when the weather changes. On particularly difficult days, when some news about Michael reached us, or when some situation brought back painful memories, we would gather on my porch, as in the old days, to cry together, to remember how far we had come, to reaffirm our commitment to never again allow anyone to separate us. Aaliyah, my granddaughter, who played a fundamental role in our story, grew up watching this family transformation. The girl who one day almost became another of Michael's victims, now became a young woman determined to make a difference. She entered law school, as she had promised, and from the start, she focused on studying cases of financial abuse against women and the elderly. "Grandma, did you know that what happened to us has a name?" she asked me one day while we were studying together on the porch. Me with my store spreadsheets, her with her thick law books. It's called financial abuse or financial violence, and it's legally recognized as a form of violence against women. She explained to me how our case, which had gained regional notoriety, was being used as an example in her classes, how professors discussed Michael's tactics, the forms of manipulation, the legal loopholes he tried to exploit. I'm writing my thesis on it, Grandma, on how to identify these predators, how laws can better protect victims, how we can prevent other cases. The pride I felt at that moment is indescribable. Seeing my granddaughter turn our pain into purpose, using our experience to help other women, was a form of redemption I never could have imagined. And she wasn't the only one. Other young women in the family, nieces, more distant cousins, all seemed inspired by our story of resistance and rebuilding. One episode I will never forget happened when Michael completed his 4 years of prison and was moved to a halfway house, serving his alternative sentence of cleaning the plaza in front of our stores 3 times a week. I would watch him discreetly from my office window, without hatred, without vengeful satisfaction, just with the serenity of someone who knows that justice, even if delayed, had been served. One day, he worked up the courage and came into the store. He was older, his hair completely gray, his body thin, his posture less arrogant. He was greeted by Rachel, who was working the counter, as she would with any customer, professional but distant. "I need to speak with Miss Morgan," he asked, his voice low, almost humble. Rachel came up to my office, her face tense. "Mom, Michael is downstairs, and he wants to talk to you." When I asked what he wanted, she shrugged. "He didn't say, but he seems different. Do you want me to send him away?" I thought for a moment and decided to see him. Not alone, of course. I asked Rachel to call her sisters, who by coincidence were all at the store that day. The 4 of us went down together, a quartet of united, strong women, with no trace of the fear or insecurity he had once exploited. Michael was waiting nervously near the entrance, twisting a worn hat in his hands. When he saw us coming down together, his face went pale. He had clearly expected to find me alone, perhaps imagining he could still use his old charm to get what he wanted. "Michael," I greeted him with a neutral tone. "How can we help you?" He cleared his throat, looked around, visibly uncomfortable with the presence of all 4 of us. "I wanted to talk to you, Patricia, in private, if possible." "I have no secrets from my daughters," I replied simply. "Whatever you want to say, you can say it in front of them." He sighed, defeated before he even began. "I'm completing my time in the halfway house soon. I'll be able to work during the day. I just have to go back at night to the shelter." He paused, gathering courage. I thought. I wondered if there might be a possibility of a job here. It doesn't have to be anything important. I can work in the stockroom, carry boxes. The silence that followed was dense, laden with memories and contradictory emotions. I looked at my daughters, one by one, and saw in their eyes not hatred or vengeance, but a mixture of pity and caution. We had discussed countless times in therapy about forgiveness, about second chances, about the fine line between compassion and self-protection. "Shall we talk in the back?" I decided, motioning to the meeting room. We all sat around the large table. I was at the head, my daughters beside me, Michael alone on the other side, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He tried to explain how he had changed in prison, how he had had time to reflect on his mistakes, how he was truly remorseful. He spoke of redemption, of new beginnings, of how he admired what we had built, even after everything he had tried to do. We listened in silence, without interrupting. When he finished, I looked at my daughters, a silent question in my eyes. One by one, they subtly shook their heads, a gentle but firm no. "Michael," I began calmly, "we appreciate your sincerity, and we genuinely hope you have changed. We believe in redemption and second chances." I paused, carefully choosing my next words. "But we also believe in consequences and in protection. What you did to our family goes beyond mistakes. It was a deliberate, calculated plan that almost completely destroyed us. We have built a safe environment here," Marta continued, her voice surprisingly gentle, "for ourselves and for dozens of other women who have gone through similar situations. Bringing you into this environment, no matter how much you've changed, would be re-traumatizing for many of them. Besides, added Lydia, always the most direct, you have skills and education. You can find a job in many other places. It doesn't have to be here, specifically in the business you tried to destroy. Rachel, who always had the softest heart, concluded, we sincerely wish you find your way, Dad, that you rebuild your life, just as we rebuilt ours, but it needs to be far from here. Michael lowered his head, accepting the decision without arguing. When he looked up again, I saw genuine tears there. Perhaps the first authentic gesture I had witnessed from him in decades. I understand and I apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything after all this, but I'm truly sorry. We accept your apology, I replied for all of us, and we wish you peace. He stood up, nodded in a contained thank you, and walked out of our lives as silently as he had entered so many years ago. We never saw him again after that. We learned from mutual acquaintances that he moved to the Midwest after completing his sentence, where he lived modestly, teaching mathematics at a public school. A simple, honest life, completely opposite to the greed and manipulation that had defined him for so long. That meeting was an important milestone in our healing journey. Not because we had completely forgiven him some wounds are too deep for that, but because we had freed ourselves from the power he had over us. We looked the man who had once terrorized us in the eyes and saw only another flawed human being, no longer an all-powerful monster. We left that room feeling lighter, as if a chapter had finally been closed. In the years that followed, we continued to expand not only our business, but also our mission. The Patricia Morgan stores became much more than a fabric shop. It was a movement, a community, a refuge. Women came from far away to participate in our workshops, often bringing stories of abuse and manipulation similar to ours. We would listen, welcome them, guide them, and refer them to psychological and legal support when necessary. Aaliyah graduated with honors in law, and despite receiving offers from big firms in Los Angeles and even New York, she chose to stay in Malibu. She opened a small office specializing in women's rights and the financial protection of the elderly, often taking on pro bono cases similar to ours. Every woman I can help not fall for a scam or recover after falling for one is a personal victory for me, she would explain with that youthful passion that filled me with hope for the future. Today, at 81, I look back and see a life that, despite all the setbacks, was worth every battle. Sitting on the porch of my house, watching the movement of the city I adopted as my own, I feel a peace that few know. A peace that comes not from the absence of problems, but from the certainty that we are strong enough to face them. My hair is completely white now. I stopped coloring it a few years ago when I realized that every gray hair is a story, a lesson learned, a battle won. My hands have age spots and ache on rainy days, reminding me of the years spent measuring fabrics, counting coins, building an empire from scratch. But my eyes, my daughters say, are still the same. Determined, sharp, capable of seeing opportunities where others see only obstacles. Our family council meetings continue religiously every Monday, although they now include many more people: my daughters, my granddaughter, nieces who have joined the business, young talents we trained in our workshops who now hold leadership positions. At each meeting, I watch with pride as this diverse group of women discusses plans and dreams, how they respect the experience of the older ones without failing to bring innovative ideas from the younger ones, how the legacy we built continues to live and grow. The Patricia Morgan stores are now 15 units spread across all of Southern California, employing more than 200 people, the vast majority of whom are women. Our workshop program has already trained more than 3,000 independent seamstresses and artisans. The microloan we started timidly has already helped hundreds of small businesswomen start their own businesses. In 2023, we were recognized as one of the most innovative companies in the textile sector in Southern California, an award I never imagined receiving at my age. Is everything perfect? Of course not. We still have challenges. We still have difficult days. We still have moments when old wounds seem to reopen. Marta, Lydia, and Rachel occasionally still have nightmares about Michael, about the manipulation they suffered, about the time lost being away from each other. I myself sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, cold, sweating, reliving the moment I discovered my ex-husband was seducing my own daughters. But the difference is that now we don't face these moments alone. We have each other. We have our community. We have the strength that only those who have been through the fire and survived know. And more importantly, we have the certainty that our story, no matter how painful it was, served as a beacon for other women, showing them that it's possible to survive, rebuild, and flourish, even after the worst storms. On Saturday nights, when the whole family gathers for dinner at my house, my daughters, sons-in-law, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren running around the yard, I look around and feel a gratitude that overflows. These people are my greatest legacy. Not the stores, not the money, not the recognition, but these lives that were somehow shaped by mine, for better or for worse. When the children ask for stories before bed, I sometimes tell them softened versions of our family saga. I talk about the grandmother who built a business from nothing, about the mothers who stood up to a bad man, about the lawyer cousin who helps other women defend themselves. I turn our pain into a fable, our struggle into a legend, so that these children grow up knowing they come from a lineage of warrior women. "Grandma, tell us again how you caught the bad man," asks my 5-year-old great-grandson, his eyes wide with excitement, as if it were a superhero story. And in a way, it is. It's the story of ordinary women who together did the extraordinary, who faced not only a manipulative man, but generations of conditioning that taught us to forgive everything, to stay silent, to endure the unbearable for the good of the family. The most precious legacy I leave to these children is not the stores, the properties, or the bank accounts. It's the certainty that they come from a family that chose the truth even when it hurt, that chose justice even when it was difficult, that chose to rebuild bonds even when it seemed impossible. A few days ago, I was reorganizing some old documents when I found a yellowed photo. I was a young, newly married woman to Michael, smiling for the camera with that naive confidence of someone who thinks she knows the future. For a moment, I felt sorry for that young woman who didn't know the pain that awaited her, but soon the feeling turned to admiration. That young Patricia, despite all the mistakes she would make, had an inner strength that would sustain her through storms she couldn't even imagine. A strength that would allow her, decades later, to look back without bitterness, just with the wisdom of someone who knows that every scar is also a medal of survival. Today, when I look out the window of my office and see the movement of the city I adopted as my own, I feel a deep connection with every woman who passes by. How many of them are suffering in silence? How many are being manipulated, deceived, and stolen from by people who swore to love them? How many think they are alone, that there is no way out, that they must endure everything for the good of the family? It's for them that I tell my story, so they know they are not alone, that there is a way out, that it's possible to rebuild, to start over, to rise from the ashes like a phoenix, that no manipulation, no betrayal, no abuse defines who we are or what we can become. As I say to my daughters, granddaughters, and all the women who pass through our stores and workshops, what breaks us doesn't have to define us. It can just be the beginning of something much stronger, much more beautiful, and much truer. My name is Patricia Morgan. I'm 81 years old, and this is the story of how my ex-husband almost destroyed my entire family, but in the end, united us like never before. My story is just one of countless others. Please click on the squares on the screen to listen to the journeys of other women who, like me, have found strength from pain and a new beginning from humiliation. Because in this country, behind every voice that is raised, there are 1,000 others still lost in silence. And it is time for them to be heard.